Hi everyone, and once again, welcome back to our journey down the road to somewhere. And today we are in season 3 and episode 4. And I want to just remind you that this is the next to the last stop in Kansas. And just to give you a little sense of what's coming up after that, when we finish Kansas and we finish the 5 books of poetry, which will be next week, we're going to take just a little break. We'll be coming back probably mid-October and again doing a 5-week session on what are called the major prophets. We'll be entering into the state of Oklahoma, and Oklahoma actually has 17 stops. And so I thought I would break that up a bit into shorter little segments. So we'll have 5 weeks of the major prophets, and then that will leave us with 12 books of what are called the minor prophets, and we'll probably jump into that first of the year. So our next series will take us up for roughly just before Thanksgiving, and we'll take a little break for Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays, and then get back in the first of the year. So that'll be season 4, and again, the prophets are fascinating, so hopefully you'll stick with us and maybe even tell someone else about what we're doing, and because I think that a lot of people, I think the prophets are probably an area that few people really know what the prophets are, particularly the minor prophets. So as you can see that today, along with episode 4, are a book of the Bible that is paired up with this episode is the book of Ecclesiastes. You know, I'll have a lot to say about that as we move along, but I'm simply going to call our episode today Meaningful Life. So again, we're in Kansas, and we're heading down to the last stop, which is a town called Baxter Springs. Actually, on this segment of Route 66, Baxter Springs is the largest town that we've been to, and it has a population of roughly around 4,000. And back when they were putting Route 66 together, and remember it was kind of cobbled together through a lot of other highways, a lot of these small towns, what they did is they made Main Street Route 66. So when you go to Baxter Springs, what you'll find is that Route 66 goes right down the main street. And even though it was bypassed by I-44, that was really what just killed a lot of these small towns. Baxter Springs is a little bit different because they've really kind of used the fact that that this was part of Route 66, and someone really began renovating all the stores on Route 66 and the shops that were there. And even just to give you an idea, this was an old Phillips 66 gas station that they renovated, and that now serves as the Kansas Route 66 Visitors Center. So Baxter Springs is a good stop on Route 66, and of course that'll be our stop for today. So in the book, what happens is that as they go down Main Street, they come to what at one point in time was called Crowell Bank. And it's been restored and renovated, but it's been turned into a cafe called the Cafe on the Route. But it's an interesting history. Someone has said that Baxter Springs was the most robbed city in America at one point in time, mainly because Bonnie and Clyde hung out around here, and this bank had the distinction of being robbed first by Jesse James and then later by Bonnie and Clyde. And Joy decides that they'll shoot their little video right in front of the bank here. And so as they begin, John is, the car is kind of pulled up in front, and John is just standing next to the car. He gives a little bit of a history of Baxter Springs, talks a little bit about the history of the bank, and also about the revival of the town. That again, it's a town that is taking advantage of the fact that it was on Old Route 66, and there's such an interest in that right now. And pretty quickly, though, because there really isn't that many places to stop in Baxter Springs, he segues into the book that's paired up with this little city, and that is the Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes. And Ecclesiastes, of course, is part of, again, what we refer to as Old Testament poetry, although it more perhaps than some of the other books of poetry definitely falls into the category of wisdom literature. And actually, I didn't know this till recently, but there was an entire genre of literature at the time that Ecclesiastes was written called Near Eastern Pessimism literature. And you'll see in a minute how Ecclesiastes falls into that if you aren't familiar with the book. John tells the audience, his video audience, that the Jewish title of the book was Koheleth, and that was a word that was usually or oftentimes is translated as teacher or preacher, the teacher or the preacher, which version of the Bible you use, you can kind of look at that beginning to see how this word is translated. The word Ecclesiastes, the word that is the title of in our English Bibles, comes from the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. And at first, if you hear the word Ecclesiastes, what might come to your mind is something like ecclesiastical, which in our English language, of course, refers to church kinds of things. The reason for that is that the Greek word for church in the New Testament is the word ekklesia, but ekklesia simply means a gathered assembly. And in the Greek, as was kind of true of the Hebrew also, the word Ecclesiastes really refers to one who addresses the assembly. That's really the meaning of the word, and when you see it translated as teacher or preacher, they're simply taking that concept of one who addresses the assembly and giving it a title that would go along with the meaning of the word. So in the book, John, as he's shooting the video, also goes on to talk a little bit about how Ecclesiastes is credited to Solomon as the author. That's what the book itself says. And people that have wrestled historically, particularly back at the time that the Old Testament canon was being put together, that means the books or the scrolls that were going to be included as authoritative for the Tanakh, which is the Jewish Old Testament. There was a lot of, kind of dispute because of the nature of the book being, at first glance, a very pessimistic, almost seeming like it has a theme that life is meaningless, which is actually not the message of the book at all. But part of the reason that it was included in the Jewish canon was because authorship had been attributed to Solomon, and that is what gave it its credibility. By the way, it also became a part of what I've talked a little bit before about the 5 scrolls, which were part of the Tanakh that was called the writings. But the 5 scrolls were books that were read at specific feasts and celebrations on the Jewish calendar. Ecclesiastes was read every year during the Feast of Tabernacles, and I'll make a little comment later on why that's so interesting. So John will begin, by the great classic reference that many of us probably are familiar with, even if we don't know much about the book, and that is the statement that Solomon, or whoever the author was, makes repeatedly: vanity, vanity, all is vanity. And part of what John does in the videos, he explains that the idea of vanity in their day really wasn't the same as what we think of when we think of vanity, because when we think of vanity, we kind of think of perhaps someone that is vain, is perhaps overly concerned with appearance or power or position, any of those things. But the actual meaning of the word in Hebrew was simply a breath or a vapor, and the idea was something that doesn't have substance. And so when something doesn't have substance, what the writer of Ecclesiastes is kind of saying that that which he's referring to, and he's going to make references to a number of different items here in the book, it just is it's like the wind. It's like a breath. It has no substance. The key idea being that it doesn't really accomplish that which it sets out supposedly to accomplish. It's interesting to me because, again, in some ways, the first reading of the book, you might be wondering, well, what is this doing in the Bible? Because all it does is talk about things that are meaningless. I've come to the conclusion that in many ways this might be the most, or at least one of the most important, perhaps the most practical book in the Old Testament, because what it's really dealing with is how to live your life and also how to find meaning in life. And it does that in this kind of backward or reverse way of spending a lot of time talking about the things that don't really give life meaning or purpose. And so you'll see, for instance, in the NIV, instead of translating it as vanity, it translates it as meaningless, 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 all is meaningless. And again, John will go into, what it is that, why this book is in the Bible, and in a sense, the purpose of it is to give some perspective. I really think that's one of the big takeaways of the book. If you will spend some time and actually watch the longer video, I think I've told you before, I usually always watch that in preparation each week, and I've got to say, I really think it's one of the best videos in the whole series. And in the video, I'll actually go into a number of the positive sides of the book, and actually very subtle tips that are given us on how to make our life more meaningful, and what to be careful to avoid putting too much priority on, because there are just certain things that don't fulfill us or make life more meaningful. So John will go into that. The key to the book, by the way, and John talks a little bit about this in the book and in the video that he's shooting, is that Solomon pursued and achieved almost every goal that modern man pursues to be happy. And the book is kind of a reflection. I think personally that it might have been written toward the end of Solomon's reign, He reigned from 970 to 930 AD. And basically, again, what he's kind of saying in the book is that power and pleasure, possessions, wealth, all of these things that we tend to pursue, he is saying it just doesn't work. That if that's what your life is consumed with, the result is that in the end, you will find that your life has been meaningless. So John is pointing that out. By the way, he also makes a reference to my book, The Solomon Syndrome. Just so you know, in the video, if you watch the longer video, it has the old cover to the book on it, because when I wrote the book, I targeted a male audience, and it went out of print. So when I revised it and updated it, which was just about a year or two ago, I made it more general, speaking both to men and to women, and this is what the cover looks like now. So if you'd like to have a copy of the book, you can go onto Amazon, and of course you just put my name in the search engine and just make sure that you get the newer version of the book. So he kind of points that out, that I've written a book on it, because you're supposed to be watching a series of videos that even in this fiction book make reference to I'm the one that taught those videos. So again, the importance, it shows us what is not going to make life meaningful or make us happy, and again gives great perspective on the things that do. I was thinking again about the longer video. If someone tells me that they've read a great book, usually, oftentimes I'll go get that book and I'll read it, because, we're always looking for something good to read. Or if someone tells, oh, this TV show is great, you ought to watch it, I'll usually respond to that. And I hate to say it because I'm the one that taught it, but this is really a great video on Ecclesiastes, and I want to encourage you, even if you haven't been watching the longer videos, this would be a good one to watch. It points out in the conclusion, in the very last chapter of the book, is really where almost the main message of the book comes through, where after all of these statements about the things that are meaningless, and some very small little hidden messages about the things that actually make life meaningful, the very last statement of the book in the last chapter is to remember your Creator in the days of your youth. And then at the end of the chapter, it talks about sort of, here's the conclusion of the matter, to be in relationship with God and to live according to His instructions. And at that point, then the video ends. Again, reason it's included in the Jewish Bible, again, probably primarily because Solomon is attributed to be the author. And at the end of the video, John and Joy actually in the book stop and go into the cafe and have lunch there and begin a discussion of what's getting ready to happen when they leave Kansas, and talk a little bit about the fact that in Oklahoma they're going to have these 17 stops, and then kind of a final little tease about what comes next week, because again, there's just one poetic book left, and that is the book, the Song of Songs, sometimes referred to as the Song of Solomon. And it is probably the one book in the Bible that is it's sexual and it's erotic, and many people, again, at the time that sort of the authoritative canon of the Old Testament was being produced, there was some debate about this book. You know, why should it be in the Bible? And I'll explain that to you next week. So again, next week will be the final episode in this series, and then we'll be picking up again in October. And again, I'll remind you of this next week, but as always, I'll be sending out some emails, and we'll be posting on Facebook when we're ready to start the new series. So watch that video on Ecclesiastes, and you have a link to it in your email, a link to it on Facebook, and a link even in the corner of the video if you're watching it on your computer, that you can go immediately to it, and we will pick up there next week.